Oh, that was interesting and also painful. If there were any more names dropped, I think I would have been crushed or something. I have a policy when you guys mention these contemporary writers is I don't commit names to memory of philosophers I read. I'll read anybody. But I don't commit their names to memory until I'm convinced their idea is especially good. I don't just remember them to memorize an argument. You know, theoretically, that'd be a slow way to learn things, because what'll happen is I'll listen to something and I'll go, that's a cool idea. I'll follow that idea through as many people and myself, my own process, as many angles as I can come up with. And then I'll have a picture of it, and then I'll hear about these names, and I'll often go like, oh yeah, that's that guy I heard 2 years ago that started me on this. Yeah, and I'll think, I should have just started studying him right away. But I heard 50 people 2 years earlier, and if I did that with everybody, so it would be inefficient. I get weighed down with all of that. So I think I'm keeping pace with my method. So I mean, like Corey, I would just prefer if you would go, oh, I know one philosopher that said this and this on that, instead of the names in their book and the whole citation right there, because people that, if they're interested, will ask you in the comments, and you could go, oh yeah, that was Hobodaken and Mikorlaki. But that's just me personally, because I'm going to wait for the ideas. I'm not against talking about these kind of characters. For example, when To Be Serious is talking about philosophers of mathematics and listening to philosophers on mathematics. Well, listening to philosophers specializing in some other field on mathematics is, it's kind of pointless. They don't get it. And there's even philosophers of mathematics that focus on it that don't get it. But I was lucky. This is one of the things where in retrospect I have to realize I was lucky. I went to a philosophy department where the philosophy of math people were more in the Bertrand Russell school, and they're actually making graduate departments with the math department trying to fix these, trying to repair all the machinery that Russell fucked up. And Russell's an interesting person to talk about, because I have his history of philosophy, and he's so status quo in so many of his opinions, like what he wrote about Nietzsche. You can see it's certainly not well informed. And in other things, he's just very much like, I guess this is what you have to teach. But then you take into logic, you go into logic, and you have a philosopher of mathematics, a logician, that really is a super mathematician at this fundamental level. And he's like the Jimi Hendrix of logic. I mean, it's just amazing. And also, even in his mainstream status quo side, it's a very liberal status quo, which was very modern for his time, very enlightened in that sense. So you gotta love him. I think he was a good person, not so insightful on the I don't know what you call it, high level of philosophy, but on logic, awesome. So when we say philosopher of mathematics, let us think of Bertrand Russell. I thought it was great, To Be Serious, a little bit intimidated maybe at first that I was projecting onto her this idea, but then she stood up with like, what are you talking about, hierarchy? That was not resolved by the end, but that was an interesting feature for me, because that's one of the things I object to is, yes, there's a visual dominance in science, in our regular lives, modern lives, for various reasons, some of them quite justified. It's a great sense, but to call that a hierarchy and stuff, well, only if you're trying to say that there shouldn't be a hierarchy, which is maybe what Professor was saying. It's hard to tell. I reject the idea that science is visual. It might seem that way, and certainly the physical sciences have always become very visual, and we use visual metaphors all the time, even for things that are not visual. But there are those things that defy that are definitely science. I mean, I was thinking even in physics, you got a Geiger counter. It could be a little light flashing, but for some reason they went with the speaker. But a better example is, for example, I just read recently of a biologist studying frogs, and she licks the frogs to do a field test, and they're not even psychedelic frogs. It's totally a measurement, like to get their alkaline level. It has to do with what she's testing. And You know, and obviously in chemistry, they teach you a lot about smells. There's no way to draw those smells or think of them any other way. In geology, and again in chemistry, texture and even taste can be very important. Basically, science to me is, you have to look at the epistemology it happened to adopt, because scientists have had all kinds of personal philosophies, but they adopted this skeptical epistemology, which is why I suggest looking at the skeptical philosophy for some answers on this. And science is empiricism, and you can be empirical about anything. And what we call material and think of as mass and time and space is really this older version, the skeptical meaning of material, which is facts that matter, things that will affect the future. And we have a stream of senses and with information, and some of those things matter. Those are material facts. And you can see the cost to you, measured in terms of your own personal satisfaction and misery. And so certain kinds of facts get related to these kinds of responses, and then you could start ignoring the responses and just look at the metaphor that you're using to identify the math. So you're just looking at distance, and you're not looking at the emotionalism of distance, of like someone close might be warm and comforting, or might be threatening. Someone far away might make you feel lonely or make you feel safe because they were the threatening one, right? We don't think about those, but they're still there behind in this chain of metaphors of where all this stuff comes from. And so we have gotten very visual in science, though hardly entirely so. Never has it truly been the case. Chemistry is an ancient science, really. It has a history before you even want to call it a science, and it uses all the senses. And that's what we're really doing scientifically, is taking our experiences, finding out which ones matter. You know, and there's material facts. The smell of a well-known poison is a material fact. And we have problems with material facts come in when something that matters only happens once. It's hard to get a handle on. You can't see the pattern. So mostly we start with our material facts on little things that matter constantly, because since they happen constantly, we can check them a lot, and that helps our analysis, the granularity of the time. We can do science on things with large granularity of time, things that only happen once every 100 years, but you need a lot longer. Or you need some statistical trick, like in the universe, there's so many stars. If you get something that blows up every 200 years, then there's probably one around you could see all the time. So you could figure out how to do that. But you need to deal with this stream, and the idea you need to get is that the science is a certain kind of information processing. Ultimately, all that our brain does is information processing, and very much of what we do can be thought of with a skeptical epistemology. And that might not mean science to some people, but basically that's it. It's having an empirical approach to everything. Measurement. Can you measure things that aren't visual? Can you measure how much you love someone? Well, it's tricky. You can't get an absolute measurement. It might not be a linear thing. You might take some sort of other trick to do it. But yes, you can, and we do, and we say, oh, I love this person a lot more than that, so I'm going to go with them even though I love them both, or whatever. Those sorts of things can be approached experientially, is my point. And that's what Lakoff, if you want to name, is trying to point out, that we're using metaphors in all of these cases, right? We use the visual metaphor. Every sense space provides sort of a fertile ground for abstract metaphor. We probably we've harvested more from sight than we have others in a way, but I don't know about that, because the things we get from other senses are so powerful that even it's like a picture's worth one smell, or something like this. So I think the voice versus vision thing would be interesting in terms of sound, a true sound thing. But when you're talking about voice, and the vision you mean is your body, that's just body language. Those are synchronized. And this whole fascination with synesthesia is interesting, but I mean, it's sort of the rule. Everything is that way. And Beethoven's famous, seeing sounds as colors and stuff. But we all do that, and it's also being explained scientifically through cognitive science research, how that functions, at least, if not entirely, why it is that way. And it's because we have these core metaphors that involve of things that involve multiple sense spaces or borrow from a sense space, right? So the idea that Corey said is very interesting. It's like, Corey, touch on things that are interesting, and then you just, I don't know, you stop right there, and it bugs me, but I wish it didn't, because I like that you got that far and took them to that. But yeah, it's like I've said before, like you're giving a tour, but you're not allowed to touch the exhibit, and I'm like, you know, we want to go, this is a field tour, we get to go touch the things. How about and that is the thing about, you can imagine where your hand is, a visual space. I like that you're trying to picture with the different visual spaces what kind of metaphors, what kind of concept of space they have, and how they're different, and how our whole view of space is a composite of all of these things and how they correlate. And for example, we have a sense of smell, but it's very non-spatial. Obviously animals somehow correlate this wafting thing, this confusing spatial thing, into spatial information. It's, you know, it's like they take the wind and the thing, and somehow they can mathematize out, and they know where to go look. They get a solid angle, a truly spatial thing, and have a visual response to it. But anyway, I went off on a tangent. So the point is about seeing where your hand is and in that feeling of potential. Well, Corey, I want to say we have a whole virtual body that is a full complement of senses, and you can imagine how it feels when you move your hand. There's a piece of paper here. I can imagine how it feels to touch the paper. Not only can I picture my hand down there, which is astute of you to notice, but I can imagine how it'll feel. And I can imagine the smell right now, the dusty paper smell, if I pick up. Now, I might be wrong. I think my visual predictions are probably a lot more accurate, and that's why we get into some justification for why visual space is used so well, because its precision is sort of like at this photon level of very potentially accurate. So when I visualize my hand down there, it would be pretty much, you know, really close, within millimeters, you know, of where I visualized it. How it felt would be a little off. Oh, it was a little off because there was a little bit of dust on the side, and I was thinking just a paper. Now that I've cleaned it, is pretty much what I thought. If I smell it, yeah, again, I was off because this is an old piece of paper, has some coffee on it, and I was imagining that paper smell that would be more like a new paper smell. Okay, but I could do all of this potentiality. Now, do I use my visual space to do it? Yeah, we draw. This is the Lakoff thing again. We're drawing metaphors from one space sense into another. You know, and categories are really just cores in a sense space that then link to another core in another sense space, and they're networks. And some of them grow really big. It might seem like it's a very centralized concept. It could be a technical definition where there's the almost appearance of absolute boundaries, but really it's always metaphors jumping from space to space, and we have to use these metaphors. And an important part is that we do a lot of thinking, like you say right now. We are visual dominate ourselves. We visual dominate ourselves. We think in visual spaces. We need to break that down and have the whole fan, the whole spectrum, and know that each sense space is its own thing and has its own kind of super powerful reasoning. I mean, smell is like having a chemistry lab. The logic of smell. You know, sound is a lot like, you know, the rhythm is such a practical thing. So it's like having Fourier, you know, number processing. No, seriously, because think about it, it's like, yeah, this is what we get from nature, and we're stuck, sounds are this way. But no, with science, we can take any data and put it into any of our sense fields in principle. And right now we can do that with sound and sight. And then someday you'll be able to do it with texture and everything else. Okay, right? If you could put things into smells, if you could give a warning light or an alarm clock that worked on smells and told you exactly what was going on, you know, it's time to wake up, but there's no meetings, it would be a little bit sweeter smell or whatever. This kind of ability will allow you to use a kind of process in your mind that has evolved for smell, which is like having this chemistry lab, or sound, which is like being able to do Fourier transforms and decompose frequencies into their sub-frequencies and separate them out. It's a very powerful space. Right? You know, and touch and texture are just amazing. I did want to point out that you're entirely wrong on touch if you think about it, because think about love and lust. The anticipations of touch and future anticipations, they can be concrete, they can be predictions, they can be wishes and hopes, they can be very vivid. in my opinion. I think a lot of times it's like they say, if you're blind, then your other senses will get more, in tune. I took that seriously my whole life, so I do think you have to break out of a visual and visuated mentality, but it can be done. I mean, like, I always was a fan of when I take walks into country roads and stuff, see how long I could close my eyes. Can I 50, 30 yards, can I do it around a turn? You might have to be a little bit careful because, like, you don't want a branch in the face, but to help heighten other senses, and that's also a point of meditation and getting rid of your visual sense, and then you have sound, and you try to get rid of all of these, and the touch, and you try to have an internal visualization of touch like you can have so well with your visual body, your imaginary body. So, that might fall back to you if you're going, no, I'm sure that I can't imagine touch. That was, maybe you need to guru a little more on that, because it can be done. And all the senses are naturally correlated. They want to correlate. And space, the scientific idea of material space, is really nothing more than a name for where we imagine the thing we imagine allows them to always be correlated if they're real. If there's a real smell, it's coming from a real location that you can see, and the thing there is making a sound you can hear, and if you touch it, it'll have a texture, and so on. And that's correlation that we base our idea of reality on. And science is studying that, but it's young. So yeah, it's gone with certain senses, but I caution you to think that it's really super fundamentally biased. It might be actually contemporarily biased towards vision. I agree with that, and that's why I like that you brought this up. But to think that it's fundamentally and then correlated that way, and that means that there's got to be things that are non-scientific. No, because really science uses all of the sense spaces, and the reasoning has to do with things that matter, material facts that you can prove the consequence of over time using image and processing, where image means any image in any sense space, like a sound image or a tactile image and so on. So that's my feedback. Cheers.